In 1892 in eastern Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was born. Named Teferi Mekanen, he was the 10th born child in a noble family in the Solomonic dynasty. His father worked in the imperial court as governor and chief advisor to Emperor Menelik II. Teferi was educated at home by private tutors and later attended a French military mission school in Addis Ababa. He received his title of count at the age of 13, and his exposure to politics at such a young age shaped his understanding of Ethiopia's challenges, including modernization and the threat of colonialism. After his father's death in 1906, Teferi's political influence grew further when his cousin Empress Sauditu appointed him as a regent, giving him the title of Ras. Even though the empress was an orthodox conservative, she allowed Ras Teferi to make modernization reforms. She also allowed him to abolish slavery and lead the empire into the League of Nations, making him de facto ruler in all but name. Having no surviving children to succeed her, Empress Sauditu was succeeded by Ras Teferi, and he took the title of Emperor Haile Selassie I. The title in Ethiopia carried a strong connection to the Solomonic dynasty, with its lineage from the King Solomon of ancient Israel and the Queen of Sheba. This made the title immensely significant as it designated the leader of Abyssinia, the Ethiopian Empire, who would guide one of the modern world's most ancient civilizations. This crowning was also significant far beyond Abyssinia's borders.
Even in the 20th century, with faith, courage, and a just cause, David will still beat Goliath.
As far back as the 18th century, a movement based on an idealized Africa began to take hold among black slaves in the Americas. Ethiopianism found expression in slave narratives, the words of slave preachers, and songs and folklore of southern black culture. Among the urban elite, Ethiopianism embraced black nationalist and Pan-African calls for solidarity with the African continent. Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism were vital in the wider campaign that eventually led to the independence of African nations. Haile Selassie played an active role in this movement through his diplomatic efforts, and helped to establish the Organization of African Unity, now known as the African Union. Throughout the diaspora, calls were made for a physical or symbolic back to Africa movement, or in biblical terms, a repatriation from Babylon and back to Zion. And out of the proliferation of these movements, Rastafarianism was born. At Teferi's coronation as emperor, he was bestowed with the title King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. The Lion of Judah is the national symbol of Ethiopia, and Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah is the title of every Ethiopian emperor. The emperor's crowning would thus come to be seen by some as fulfillment of prophecy in the books of Isaiah and the Psalms of a black king that would come as a redeemer, and Ethiopia was seen as Zion or the Promised Land. Even though Haile Selassie himself never accepted the title of Promised Messiah, he granted them land in the Rift Valley for a settlement in Shashamane. Emperor Selassie would later embark on a long-awaited visit to Trinidad, Jamaica and Haiti, who had supported Ethiopia during their struggles against Italian invasion. Rasta prophecy said that one morning the sole white dove would fly over the assembled Rastas, followed by a short shower of benediction. And as the crowds in Kingston waited for Selassie's arrival, some reports claim that the rain began to pour, which was seen as having divine significance. The sun came out when the plane landed, and scenes of pandemonium and celebration ensued. Throughout Jamaica's documented history, no external visitor has ever captured as much attention as Haile Selassie, surpassing even Queen Elizabeth II, who had visited the previous month. Just 3 years before Selassie's visit to Jamaica, the Coral Gardens Massacre, also known as Bad Friday, took place in Jamaica. Jamaican police and military forces detained Rastafarians throughout Jamaica, killing and torturing an estimated 150 victims. The massacre created a backdrop of suffering and injustice, making Selassie's visit a powerful source of validation, hope, and revitalization for Rastafarians who had endured persecution. When Emperor Selassie died, Rastafarians were forced to confront the contradiction of a living deity passing away, but the movement lives on today in several denominations, or mansions of Rastafari, with the largest population being in Jamaica, and with Haile Selassie still seen as a divine figure. In 1935, Italy under Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in their second attempt to colonize the country in the scramble for Africa. The Italians had previously been defeated by a well-disciplined Ethiopian army 39 years earlier at the Battle of Adwa. On this second attempt by the Italians, Selassie knew he would need to gather an alliance to defeat the fascist war machine. Haile Selassie pleaded to the League of Nations to help stop the Italian aggression, and his efforts would make him an icon for anti-fascists around the world, being named Time magazine's Man of the Year. But there was no concrete action or alliance, with several members of the League having themselves participated in the scramble for Africa. Haile Selassie was forced to flee into exile in Jerusalem, and while there, he prayed with Ethiopian monks at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, before moving to live in exile in Bath in England. Together with his family, government advisors, staff, and a number of Ethiopian refugees, he ruled as Ethiopia's leader in exile at Fairfield House, rallying international support to fight the occupation in Ethiopia. Among many horrific atrocities, Mussolini and his black shirts brutally slaughtered Ethiopia's young social elite in what would be known as the Addis Ababa massacre. He did this so as to make the occupied population easier to control and manipulate. The British finally allied themselves to Selassie after Mussolini allied himself with Adolf Hitler. And with international backing, Selassie returned to Ethiopia, empowering the resistance to drive the Italians into retreat. The Italians had dismantled and removed several of Ethiopia's ancient stone obelisks, artifacts and national treasures, and transported them to Italy as spoils of war and symbols of Italian triumph. Some artifacts were returned, such as the obelisk of Aksum, which was returned 68 years later to its home in the heart of the ancient Aksumite Empire. After Italy's defeat, Ethiopia stood alongside Liberia as the only two countries in Africa not to have been colonized. Haile Selassie would later seek to re-establish diplomatic ties with Italy, but the scars of the Italian occupation lingered, and the two nations would have a complex relationship in light of historical grievances. In the early 1970s, a famine had begun raging in Ethiopia due to drought conditions and crop failures, and it was made worse by growing political instability. But this famine was largely unknown to the outside world until journalist Jonathan Dimbleby revealed horrific and heartbreaking images of hunger that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Critics of Haile Selassie's government claimed that he had not adequately addressed issues of land reform, rural development, and poverty alleviation. There were grievances that his reforms would often be implemented to benefit the wealthy, leaving rural populations vulnerable in times of crisis. In 1973, Haile Selassie was accused of spending $35 million to celebrate his 80th birthday while people died of starvation. And by not being honest about the severity of the situation, he failed to mobilize help quicker and save lives. But now, as the famine dragged on, the discontent among the people grew. Conflicts were breaking out across the country, which stopped aid from reaching certain areas, while different factions redirected aid to strategic areas. A perfect storm was brewing, with some of Selassie's soldiers even starting a mutiny over the scarcity of water. And so, despite having reigned for over 4 decades in the proud tradition of the Abyssinian Empire, and despite being revered by millions of Rastafari around the world, the days of the emperor and his dynasty were now numbered. In the midst of the chaos and suffering, a committee of low-ranking officers in the Ethiopian army formed the Derg, a Marxist-Leninist military junta that consolidated power in a slow-moving coup d'etat. The so-called creeping coup came to a head when the Derg placed the emperor and members of his family under house arrest in the imperial palace. During his year in captivity, Haile Selassie's health deteriorated, and in August of 1975, it was announced that he had died of natural causes. However, it would later emerge that he had been strangled on the orders of the military government led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, whose executions and atrocities earned him the name, the Butcher of Addis Ababa. And thus is the legacy of Haile Selassie, a charismatic leader who rallied his countrymen and the world, even coming to be worshipped as a divine leader. He was a key figure in the resistance against fascism, even though some faulted him for fleeing into exile. The abolition of slavery in Ethiopia is part of his legacy, even though the effects of slavery are felt to this day in the marginalization of the formerly enslaved Shinkela communities. Notably, he failed to reform the feudal system and land distribution, leading to inequality and unrest. His handling of the famine was a large part of his downfall, even though the Derg who overthrew him would also go on to indulge in luxury while a horrific famine once again raged on. Selassie was criticized for neglecting the concerns of some of the ethnic groups in his diverse country. To others, he was seen as a unifying figure who strengthened the Ethiopian identity and maintained Ethiopian sovereignty. With all that said, he has taken his place in history as the last leader of the Solomonic dynasty, and the last emperor of one of the world's most ancient and enduring civilizations.